Commissioner Goodson.
Here.
And make note, Commissioner Swenson and Evans are not able to attend, and Commissioner Talcott is here. So, would you please stand and join me with the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, first item is the consent agenda. The consent agenda is made up of routine, day-to-day items that require board action, but do not appear to have a significant public interest. Items may be pulled from the consent agenda for separate discussion or vote by any board member. Consent agenda includes the approval of the board minutes for March 31, 2015, payroll checks totaling $70,912.64, maintenance and operation checks totaling $246,826.86, the approval of the passenger facility charge totaling $60,000, and the financial reports for March. If there are any agenda items that present a conflict of interest and consequently require a member to abstain from the vote or discussion of the vote, if there are any, let us know. If not, we'll entertain a motion for the consent agenda.
Make the motion to accept the consent agenda as written.
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? It's unanimous. John, Chairman's report. Anything to talk about?
We got a lot, actually, and we'll start off maybe with the exciting day we had yesterday. The Great Falls Airport was visited by DC-3 yesterday, and we were fortunate enough, Commissioner Buck and Vince Bakke from Cloudcatcher Aviation were able to intercept those guys coming into town and get some aerial photography, which we just got, and some video too. So we actually have some really exciting photos that we'll be sharing around and eventually putting on the website of that DC-3 arriving. This plane was a Navy plane in World War II, and then after the war went on to have a commercial career with a airline out of Minneapolis. And so it's now with a fellow by the name of Dwayne King with the Kingdom Air Corps, and he's flying it from here over to Siberia. Yatsuk, I think is the way you say the name of the town. He's been invited by the governor over there to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the German surrender on May 7th through the 9th in Siberia. So he's on his way to do that now, and the plane is taking the original Alaska-Siberia route, which started here in Great Falls. About 8,000 planes flowed to the Russians during World War II from Great Falls, and thus the two AVMAX hangars that we have today, which were part of that program. And so really a kind of a neat piece of history yesterday. The DC-3, which was a C-46 in the war for the Army, and then I couldn't even begin to tell you what the Navy number is. It's about 7 or 8 characters long, but was not one of the planes that went over to Russia during Lend-Lease. But given the time of year that he was planning this journey and flying in winter conditions up through Alaska into Siberia, and the ability to have 2 engines, this is probably a wise choice to make that 70th anniversary. So neat guy, and we got to spend the evening with him. I'd say we probably had, my guess would be about 200-300 people come up and see the plane yesterday. It was on public display from 2:30 to 5. We got it parked in front of the wood hangar. And then as coincidence would have it, AVMAX is working on a plane that's, I think it's Yatsuk Airlines, isn't it?
Yep.
So it actually is from the town he's headed to. And this morning we were able to get them positioned in front of each other, DC-3 up against the Dash 8, and get some photography for both AVMAX and the plane owner. So really neat couple of days, and really like to thank Dwight and Commissioner Buck and Vince for spending that time to help us pull this off and get the public up here. We were contacted by a gal out of Polson who is real familiar with this history. She's written a historical fiction on the Lend-Lease program, and so she came up yesterday with some historic photos, and as a lot of kids came through, She was able to show them what that area of the airfield looked like during the war and explain the route to them, and she sold some books. Just a really good day. I'm excited when we can offer the airport up in that capacity to celebrate the history of our industry and even our community. And I just remind everybody, on July 18th and 19th, we'll be visited by a second group, and probably a bigger group. In fact, this event continues to grow. The Bravo 369 is coming. That's the name of the group, and they have an awesome trailer on YouTube. If you just put in Bravo 369 and look for the trailer on there, they've already produced a kind of a movie quality trailer about their mission that they're doing in July. They're going to fly the Alaska-Siberia route also. Right now, it looks as though they're going to fly it in Texans. They've got a couple of Texans lined up, and then there's a SkyTrain or two, which is a big cargo plane that we gave to the Russians also, that's going to meet them here. So we're actually going to have 2 Russian planes coming in, probably ones that flew through this airport, and they're going to meet them here, and then the group is going to fly the ALSIB route up to Fairbanks, because the Bravo 369 planes are military in nature, and given the sensitivities, they won't be continuing into Siberia. So they'll all board the SkyTrain and fly into Siberia that way. So another great event. We're working with a couple of aviation museums around the country. We're hoping to have some lectures during that event. That's a whole weekend. The Bravo 369 guys have arranged a sponsorship from wargaming.com, which I guess is a kind of online gaming website that's very prevalent, particularly in Europe. And they're going to have a demonstration room here during the event, so that you can come up and play their online game, actually here in the airport. We're trying to line up some speakers. We're going to make contact with the gal that has the National WASP collection. The WASP were the women pilots that flew most of the planes into Great Falls from the various factories around the U.S., Seattle, Wichita, Buffalo, bringing the planes into Great Falls. So we think it's going to be a really neat event. We're hoping we might get some artifacts here from on loan to the History Museum. The History Museum's having a big event that Saturday night where they're going to open up their nightclub downstairs there and have people come in. We're just really looking to make this a real neat historical opportunity to see some warbirds. And we're getting invitations out to warbirds around the states to try and turn up as many as possible. I've contacted a P-63 owner. That's one of the planes that went over to Siberia, and I can only find 2 of them still flying. So if we could get one of them up here, that'd be really interesting. About 2,500 of those went over, along with about 5-6 different frames. A few Thunderbolts went over. We're going to try to find a Thunderbolt, and then if you don't know the history, after the war, the Guard unit flew P-51s. So we're going to try to get some P-51s up here too, to just celebrate that whole era of aviation. So we're hoping the Tribune will help us maybe get an article in the USA Today for that event, because it will be a pretty historic event, and these guys are doing a great job of trying to sell the entire idea as a documentary to the Smithsonian and the Discovery Channel to actually produce a full kind of special on the Lunar Lease program. So really good promoters. Check out their, in fact, now that I think of it, I wish we would have had it on screen. Maybe we'll do that for May. We could show that 7-minute trailer they've got. It's really awesome. But yeah, they're a good group, and there's even an opportunity. They may be bringing in a Russian diplomatic delegation. They're in contact with the consulate with the Russians, and so that'd be kind of interesting to have a Russian presence here during the event too. So really neat weekend of aviation we'll have on the 18th and 19th of July. And then the other things I have to report this month, discussions with MDOT on the road corridor have kind of hit a loggerhead. You may recall we were trying to get that corridor in time to do a mill and overlay this summer. About a month or 2 ago, we had to retreat on that and kind of shift the project around. So we're going to be doing mill and overlay on the terminal frontage out here instead, and we're going to avoid the portion of the road from the water tower back until we can get that resolved. We had understood that if we took the federal aid route or urban route designation off of that road, that we would have more control over the design of the road and signs and things like that. I had a call yesterday, and MDOT is stuck to their ways of controlling everything on that road, even though we've paid for the maintenance of that road now since the 80s through airport grants. They want to be in control of how that road is maintained. For instance, as soon as we would repave that road, they want us to apply a chip seal to the top of the road in order to increase the friction on it. I explained to them we typically don't do that with our roads, and when we plow it, it ends up in the ditch causing drainage issues. But that is their standard. In addition to that, our only option for signage is the lovely highway green that you see throughout the state if we let them continue to control the road. So we told them yesterday, well, the other problem it causes for us is we can't cut that road at any point for infrastructure. We would always have to drill, which, that right there is a $40,000 delta every time we've got to run infrastructure back and forth across that road. So we told them in the interest of everyone, it makes really no sense for the highway department to own an entrance to one business, the airport. They have really no interest in that long term. We'd like to pursue acquisition of the corridor. And so they're going to take that back and try to figure out what that would mean. But I think in the long term, it's in our best interest to control that because it is our only access into the airport. We've been dependent on ourselves to pay for that maintenance over the years. The lights are our lights, are non-standard lights. I'm surprised they were allowed to go up, given the brick wall we've hit with the signage. So for our current project, the two signs, there are two blue signs that are on their property. I told our engineer yesterday I'd like them to back those up onto our property out of the right-of-way, which makes them go about 10 feet or more away from the road, make the signs bigger, and make them blue. So we're going to put them on our property, and we'll have the same sign, they'll just be larger in order to compensate for not being as close to the road. And then in the interim, we'll continue to try to work with MDOT on acquiring that roadway so that in the future we don't face these types of issues. I think it's just better for all parties. I mean, we had 6 or 7 people on the phone yesterday for 45 minutes, getting a whole lot of nothing done for both parties. It just doesn't, in the long term, make sense for either of us, I don't think, to continue to work that way. In future board meetings, hopefully we'll be bringing to you an acquisition proposal. We've got to go back to '66 and look at the initial acquisition of that corridor. Rod and I looked at some photos yesterday, and it appears a lot of that land actually came from the airport. My guess is in those days that land was probably given, and so we'll have to look at how that was acquired, because it may be that we actually gave them the land and giving it back might be relatively easy. We're going to be looking into that over the next few months. You'll hear more. Ideally, we'll get this done in time to mill and overlay that piece of the road next summer, and then that way we'll have all of our primary access roads done by this time next year. The good news is we're going to get this part out in front of the terminal fixed this year, and so most of our terminal loop will be done in this project this summer.
So was that a part of our airport road project?
Yeah.
So we had the project, and then we added to the budget
Yep.
last month. Now we're reducing the project?
No, we added the budget last month in order to replace the signage, because we realized as we got into it, the sign.
But we're kicking the can down the road.
Well, we had opted to take the lane mileage that we would have done from here to the interstate and substitute in the terminal frontage. So as we got to about 60% design, we told the engineers to throw in, I think it was about 60%, might have been before that, to throw in the terminal frontage instead of the roadway out to the highway, because it became apparent that MDOT was moving at a slower pace than they had indicated they would initially for us to get an easement. And so, I think around Thanksgiving, we finally just made the decision that we've got to move on with the project. We're not going to get it done in time to design their part of the road, so let's substitute the terminal piece and keep going, because we control it.
So you still hope to get to $2 million project?
We'll still get you'll still get about the same lane mileage. It's this wider piece out in front instead of the piece down to there. So we'll still get good work done. It's just we had hoped to also get to start on the access roads, and now we're going to have to kick that piece of the project on to a future phase. But we will get this piece done, which we had planned on doing in a future phase. And actually, it works out well with Frontier not coming back this year. The curb front will be a little less crowded. So it's probably a good year to get it done in front of the terminal. So.
Okay.
And the other thing I was going to mention is in the first 2 weeks of May, I think it's the second week of May actually, Allegiant's having their annual conference. As I've mentioned in the past, Allegiant typically doesn't accept meetings at the joint conferences where where they already have service. They'll meet with new airports, but they won't meet with the existing tenants. They instead expect the existing tenants to come to their conference, which is in spring every year. And so that conference is coming up in mid-May in Las Vegas, which is their headquarters. So we'll be out to see them, talk a little bit, still post-mortem on the LAX route. It seems like there's still some opportunity for that in a year or two as they get figured out what they're going to do in that city long-term. So we'll continue to be talking to them about that. Some future plans also. We think as they get the 319s into their fleet, there'll be some opportunities for longer haul flying. They're starting to experiment with that right now westbound. You're seeing them going to Las Vegas from, I think Lansing was one of the more recent announcements, probably one of the longest stage links in the country, other than the Hawaii flying. So we're starting to see them cross the Mississippi. After 9/11, they kind of adopted a rule of we don't cross the Mississippi. If you're east, you go to Florida. If you're west, you go to Vegas and Phoenix. And now they're starting to overfly that a little bit. So we think in the future, as they get that new Airbus into their fleet, there'll be some opportunities, and we continue to talk to them about those. So we'll see them here in a couple weeks. The other thing I was going to note, the car condos have expressed interest in expanding. We'll look out here in the window, maybe at the break. We've got a couple candles down there, traffic candles, on the bounds of their new boundary. But essentially, there's a grass piece when you come into the parking lot there, just on your left. Before that, you see one building longer than the other. They want to make those two buildings approximately the same length. And I think there's plenty of room in there that would still leave us enough room to widen that entrance if we wanted. But it's right where the short-term and long-term break. So there's not really a good reason to keep that piece of grass. It doesn't fit well into either lot. So we think expanding those car condos, getting a little bit of additional rent makes sense. They think they can get, about 12 condos down there, and they have a waiting list on those. So I think it's a good use of land, gets us a little more rent, finishes their development here. We've already told them we won't let them execute future stages behind the car condos closer to the road. We have a preliminary design for a parking lot expansion out there. We can get another 67 stalls back in there in that little alcove. So we've told them that's off the table. The board had sent them a letter, I think 3 years ago, telling them that. But this expansion we think would work fine. So we'll be bringing that to you probably at the May meeting. Okay. And the other thing I was going to mention is the noise program, where we are right now. We met with the community group a couple of weeks ago, it was about a week and a half ago, to talk about the rough draft, or rough draft of the noise study, which we have already commented on. And the outcome of that is more or less that as we said last month, the noise program is complete. The neighborhoods are compatible with the current level of airport noise as modeled by the study. And so we met with the community group, which included a couple representatives from the neighborhood councils, and informed them of that, also some user groups from the airport. And there's a public draft coming out, will be made public here in about 2 weeks. It'll be available at the libraries, at City Hall, at county offices, so that folks can read that study. And then there's a public workshop on May 27th. Which is right at the day after our board meeting. And so that'll give the public an opportunity to come up, hear from our consultant, learn more about the Part 150 update, and then after that we'll start the public comment period. So the noise study on the trajectory it's on right now would wrap up towards the beginning of fall. After there's going to be a federal comment period out there, and the FAA's got to then adopt it. And so once that's complete, it would be our official noise contour. We're kind of in a transition period right now where the FAA has indicated that they think the noise is compatible. They've asked us to hold bids or actually cancel the bids, and then they'll hold the grant open until that study is adopted this fall in the event that the outcomes of the study would change.
So how did it go over?
I thought it went really well. I think people, that at the meeting, I think the general consensus was it is what it is. We all recognize that the operations have changed, And really, when you look at the portfolio of things that the FAA has done in the last 20 years to make airports more compatible, this is a real success story. They got rid of the Stage 2 aircraft, and they had hush-kitted a lot of the older airplanes, and then as those airplanes have left the fleet, the new requirements for noise are much more stringent. And we see that with the departure of the 727, which was an old generation plane, and the introduction of the 757 from FedEx. So right there is a company evolution from a louder plane, which did have some impact on our noise contour, some pretty draconian impacts, to a much quieter plane. So I think overall you have to look at this is happening nationwide, and it's a much more positive story than it was 15, 20 years ago in terms of airports' ability to coexist with neighborhoods.
Okay.
And the last thing I was going to mention is Maria's been working on a new passenger facility charge application. As we've looked at our capital program, we're at that time of year when the FAA wants us to start looking at our capital program for the next couple of years. The residential sound insulation program had about another 5-year life, and the program was more or less being used to fund our local share on the residential sound program. With that leaving the capital program, we need to reprogram those dollars into the capital program again, and so we're preparing a new PFC application, which we're trying to get submitted this year, yet this fiscal year. And what that would do is take the $250,000 or so we were spending every year on noise insulation and apply it to new programs. And so the runway program that we're about to embark on next year, the 1634 bill and overlay, with the addition of the taxiway C, which will be built parallel to it, and then the taxiway C connector. Our local share for that project alone is about $850,000, and so that'll eat up about 4 years and a half of our current PFC collections that exceed the terminal ramp, which is a project that's been since the terminal ramp was done many years ago. The PFC revenues have been paying that back. And so the rest of the revenue will be used for that, primarily the match on that runway program. And then we are allowed to go out 7 years with our collection authority. So the last 2 years we're going to pay for our snow equipment that we're going to buy. We'll reimburse ourselves for that. It's in the current year's budget. The upcoming year's budget. And so we'll reimburse ourselves for that project. And then we've also included in there that's not correct. We'll buy a future piece of snow equipment with that in about 2 years in the PFC application. We can always reprogram the dollars, so we don't need authorization now, but that we're allowed to program ahead with the FAA for what we want to spend that money on in the current application. So we've put in there a snow blower, which we'll buy in about 2 years, hopefully. And then the last piece of it we're going to use for the future expansion of the SRE building, which is another 2-3 years out too. So we'll be using up that full 7 years of excess collection with this PFC application, and that'll probably come to the board at the May meeting also, maybe possibly the June meeting, just depending on when materials are ready. I did want to let you know that we're starting to work on that, and that's all I have.
That's quite a bit. Any questions for the director?
In last week's summary, I think you said there were about 12 phone calls on the residential sound program. But you didn't say whether they were negative, positive, or balanced.
So a lot of the calls that we've gotten so far are folks in the program that had their houses designed, but we're supposed to be in there measuring right now for windows, and so they were calling to say, what's the status of where we are. So I think you'd probably regard most of those as negative calls because after last week we told Steve Brown to notify everybody in that program. Now that we've gotten some FAA comments back and we've got the public meeting scheduled and everything, we said go ahead and notify everyone in that 25 homes that have been designed that we've canceled the bid, and we at this point the FAA has told us that they see that our homes are compatible. That's what most of them were about. I have to say Steve does a really nice job with those calls too. He's done a nice job of explaining the situation to everybody.
Any other questions for the director? Okay, we'll move on to our first agenda item, Passive Capital Projects entry exit road rehab budget.
Yeah, we in the last month, I described to you what we're trying to do this summer with that project, and we thought we had the budget settled. But in the last month, in talking to Dwight, he has some pavement needs over there adjacent to the Department of Homeland Security hangar. The original concrete from the World War II construction is still there, and there's been some patching done to it intermittently, mostly asphalt patching. But the top surface, like most of our World War II concrete out there, is starting to flake off and really come loose. So there's creating some FOD issues out there with the existing pavement. So Dwight had contacted me about 3-4 weeks ago and just indicated that he'd really like to get something done with that this year. And did we have any ideas on the what would work well? And so it just so happened we had an engineer coming into town that next week, and from CH2M Hill, and so we went over there and looked at it, and they recommended the same type of treatment that we did several years ago when we patched the area near AdMax, which is to go over top of that concrete with an asphalt course. Given the strengths that we have and the fact that the ground has been in the same spot for 60, 70 years now, we get very little movement there, and so going over top of that concrete with an asphalt overlay seems to be working really well. And it's been done in 3 or 4 different areas over there, spanning about 10-15 year period now, and has lasted really well. And so what we came up with is to, in order to save quite a bit of money on the project for Dwight, the best thing to do is to put this project into our program this year in order to get the volumetric price down. It just adds more volume to our project, which lowers our price, and obviously adds quite a bit more volume to his project. So he'll get the advantage of that lower price on the project, and then what we'll do is once we have bid prices on the project, Dwight will decide if he wants to proceed with that pricing, and if he does, then he'll pay us ahead of time, and then we'll just pay the bill as it comes in with the rest of our project. And so what we've got in the packet here is we're out of spending authority. Obviously, in order to add that, we threw a number at it, $200,000 to the project in order to do Dwight's ramp there. We need to amend the spending authority up by an additional $200,000. That's what you see in the packet here. Is we're now asking for $2.45 million, up from $2.2 million, and you can see in the funding sources down there, we're estimating that about $200,000 of that will be refunded by Dwight before the project is completed. We don't have, I don't know if you've got an engineer's estimate yet. I threw $200,000 out there just to make sure we didn't extend past our spending authority. At the time, the engineer didn't have a good estimate. I don't know if you've gotten one since then.
Your words are the first.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm just trying
And
to
he's choking.
I'm trying to catch my breath here.
Yeah, it's probably much less than that, but I told the engineers I didn't want to exceed our authority, because that's what we're not supposed to do, and so.
But it's dollar for dollar.
Yes, yeah. And he might decide that it's too much and just not do it, and so it could be that we just won't buy that quantity on the contract, and that's the way we've set the contract up.
Is that included?
John, I'd just like to also reiterate, I didn't hear you mention this, but I reached out to John because I wasn't sure what design standard to reconstruct that ramp to. And so as John and Rod do that every day on the airport, I felt that it was important to do that. And so it's an airport engineer, and they write the specifications for it, and it's your land. Ultimately, it's your ramp. I'm just the current caretaker of it, so I think it's advantageous for you to control it in that regard.
Well, and it's good too, because the engineers know exactly what polymer is best for an airfield pavement. Up here happens to be the road polymers, but in a lot of places it's a different mix for airfield and road. So it's good to have that consistency, so we don't have a failure, right at a joint there between the ramps or anything.
So that is land leased by Holman?
Yeah. Dwight leases the land, and then he subleases, I guess is what you would say, to the government, to the air branch.
Typically, there's design or engineering costs, and all those will be included in, or proportioned out, or whatever.
Exactly, and so Dwight, you're paying that directly, right? Or are we running that through our contract too?
I don't know, but I do know I'm paying it. I just don't know which vehicle I'm paying it at.
Yeah, it'll go through. It's the exact same design they used 2 years ago to do the area near AvMax there. So they're able to replicate the same
Right.
plan set and everything. But yeah, if there is engineering costs, we'll either direct bill him.
Well, and usually there's testing too.
Well, they'll
because-
definitely be proctoring and whatnot.
Right, so you'll want to have that done.
Yeah.
That protects you.
And then, as John mentioned, we did this already at the AVMAX resurfacing that the airport did a few years back. And a portion of that project was already under our leasehold. And so John at that time reached out to me and asked me to reimburse the airport authority for the stuff that I was leasing. And so we kind of are doing the
We've already
same
done
thing
that.
again.
Yeah.
Okay. So you need a motion to approve raising.
I'm missing a page there. Oh, I see the mark.
Okay.
Yes, we need to modify the spending authority to increase the project budget from $2.2 million approved to $2.45 million approved for the project. I think my packet's missing the recommended action page.
You have it now?
It's just on that last page.
Oh, maybe that is it. Okay.
It's in my package.
Oh, yeah, funding update. Here we go. Yeah.
Oh, the funding update, yeah, okay,
I'll
gotcha.
move that we increase the spending from 2.2 to 2.45 as listed in the work item.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the additional funding for this project. Are there any questions or comments at this time? Yes.
One question just thought of it. Should Holman decide not to pursue it, do we want to put some wordage to revoke the 200,000?
We just won't buy the quantity. Yeah, and that's
That work won't be done. It'll be broken out on the bid sheet, I presume, so that it can be separate. So it'll be bid by the contractor, correct me if I'm wrong, but if they, and the same thing with the airport authority too, if there are certain things they decide not
We
to
may
do.
cancel those.
Yeah, I mean, as well. It's just up to that amount, but if they decide not to do it, then it's.
For instance, we're planning to overlay the overflow lot. We did a 2-inch construction last season. We've got a line item in there to put another 2 inches on top, but if the pricing's bad, we'll defer that to next year when we've got a bigger paving program. So we've kind of set up some schedules in there that, if we get good pricing, we award them. If we don't, then we cancel the schedule.
It is dollar for dollar though, so if you do, say Holman decides not to do it, the $200,000 wouldn't be spent elsewhere because it is being reimbursed.
Right, yeah, our funding plan there shows that, we need $200,000 from Dwight to complete the funding plan. If we don't have the $200,000, then we won't be able to complete the funding plan, we'll have to cancel work.
Okay.
It's his money.
One other thing
It's his money.
One other thing I would note, and I forgot to note, is we've reshuffled the funding plan in the last month in there. As we canceled C1 at the last board meeting, we have come back and applied our AIP grants to this program for the year. So we had, in discussions with the FAA, we weren't sure what we were going to do with this year's AIP, whether we'd be applying that to next year's program. But by using it this year, it'll actually increase the amount of funding we'll have next year from discretionary, so that we can apply that money, that we can receive that money from the FAA and use our current entitlement grants to fund the roadway program this year. So we had planned to come out of pocket for close to $1 million on this program, but because we're able to reapply our entitlement funds this year, that out-of-pocket amount will be much less. And the $600,000 that we applied from the terminal program will actually just go straight to reserves. So this is a much better funding plan for us than what we had last month. But because we did cancel C1, it frees up those entitlement monies to be used this year. So the good news is we'll do some reserve building this year that we had not planned on. And that'll be better for us for next year. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? It's unanimous. So, airline agreement extension, John.
Yes, hot off the presses. You'll see next to your packets here, we printed a letter yesterday on the airline extension. We had been discussing with the airlines a couple amendments to the airline agreement. Those discussions, we kind of reached a point where I didn't think we were going to break through. So we had offered to just extend the agreement that we have, and both of us kind of, give up on our pet projects. And so we had a really good call yesterday morning before the DC-3 got here, and we did get through with a couple of business items. So we're adjusting what we want to do with that agreement slightly, and this memo that you had next to your packet supersedes the business deal that we have in the packet. And the only two things that are changing, we're getting a 3-year extension, which is really important because that's a commitment by the airlines that they're going to be here for 3 years. If they're not here, they have to pay the terminal rent for that period regardless. With Alaska making a schedule change and investing in Great Falls, it's good to see they were willing to come back and commit to a 3-year period. We think that's a positive sign. And then on top of that 3-year agreement, we did make 2 business deal changes. The first is a change to the capital project majority and interest vote. And what that is in the old days, the airlines used to approve projects at airports pretty much line item by line item. And so they would go through and say, yeah, we'll support this, we won't support this. And over time, as you can imagine, airports became very frustrated with that process because oftentimes projects that might have been mandated by the FAA or needed by the community wouldn't be able to move forward. And so over the years, that process has evolved, and what we have in our agreement right now, which I negotiated back in 2011, is a pretty high bar. We can spend $900,000 of authority dollars on a project in the airline-supported cost centers before we have to ask permission from the airlines to do it. And so what that means is, take for instance our runway project next year, we plan to spend $9 million on that program. But our portion of it's only $900,000. So we can proceed with that program without asking the airlines permission, even though they will ultimately refund us the $900,000. Now, if we do a project outside the airline cost center, like let's say we wanted to build a new AVMAX hangar, the airlines don't get to vote on that at all. We can do that with our own funds, and they don't get to vote on that. We can do anything underneath that $900,000 cap outside or in the airport funds. Like for instance, if we want to go out and overlay a fog seal on the runway for $800,000, we can do that without permission. If we exceed $900,000 in the airline-supported cost center in a year, we have to go to them for a vote. If they choose to vote against the program today, we can implement that program 6 months later. So even if they vote against it, we can wait 6 months and come back and do it again. What we've agreed to in the extension period, which is 3 years, is to defer that for 18 months. So we did give them an additional period of a year to defer a project. And it's a good faith move, I think, on our part to say, listen, we're partners in this. If you object to a program, we understand, that we will give it some time. The things that are immune from that are emergency projects, like we have a hole in our runway, sinkhole or something that we have to fix and it's going to be expensive. We can do that without an airline interest. Any regulatory compliance move, if the FAA comes in tomorrow and says you must disconnect 725, it's a hotspot and it's really bad and you got to spend money and do that, we can do that without a vote of the airlines. But we did concede to this. This is a concession. For the 18-month period, they will be able to delay a project for or for a 3-year period, they'll be able to delay a project for 18 months. Then what we had been asking for and what we've gotten in this amendment also is we're going to do some adjusting to how we do our revenue sharing. Today, when you look through our rates and charges, we have a revenue sharing model which says basically after we look at all of our cost centers, all of our capital costs that are not airline supported directly, if there's excess cash beyond that, we'll share 40% of it in our airline rates. And in the old days, we would have shared all of it. The old airline agreements, they paid for just what we couldn't make elsewhere. And so we would have shared all that revenue. Today, we only share 40%. And what we've experienced over the last 3-4 years since I negotiated the last extension was our parking revenue has grown about 60% in 5 years. And that is attributed to the terminal rent. So the terminal rent has come down pretty significantly. Meanwhile, most of our capital costs going forward are in the airfield, which is typical at an airport. And so the airfield costs has continued to grow. And with opportunities for future growth from FedEx, we want to manage those rates so that we keep both rates low and in a range that is low competitively with others. And so we had been asking the airlines if we could adjust our credit of that surplus revenue to a 90% airfield, 10% terminal base. And in this current budget year, we'll continue with 85-15, and then in the next 2 years, we'll go to 90-10. So we think that's a good step forward for us. It'll help us keep that landing fee down, which does, and the airlines recognize this, and one of the reasons they're not keen on it, is it shifts the financial burden towards the passenger carriers somewhat away from the landing fee carriers like FedEx and some of the others that just do landing fees. So we did want to make that change, because like I said, we want to kind of manage that landing fee sum in order to increase the overall business for the airport. And I pointed out to Delta yesterday as we talked about it, one benefit they get today is last year with the additional Vancouver flights, FedEx paid 43% of all landing fees at this airport. And so they get the tremendous benefit of having that key partner there to pick up a lot of our airfield cost that they would have to pay if FedEx wasn't here. So over the long haul, we want to maintain that competitive advantage in order to grow that business and have FedEx pay more and more of that landing fee, such that the passenger carriers don't have to carry that burden themselves. So what we're asking for is permission to extend the agreement for 3 years, and we'll make these 2 business deal changes, and that'll carry us through 2018, fiscal year 2018.
Any questions?
Do the airlines generally get involved with the capital projects to any measure?
In the old days, yes. They used to approve everything, just like in your operating budget. Most airports have evolved away from that model, and some airports, they don't have any ability to do that. When I was up working for a financial consultant in Anchorage, Anchorage wanted them to have no say over what capital projects are done. But as you can imagine, as business partners, I mean, you have to be. There has to be some give and take there, and so you want to maintain your costs low, and you want the airlines to have some ability to say, well, that's a bridge too far. We need to find a more inexpensive way to do that. And so at our airport, before this agreement, the airlines had, I think they had the ability to approve everything, Laura. Do you remember before 2011? Up to 75,000, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think they did.
Yeah, I think they could approve anything above 75,000. When I came in, I said, yeah, it's a burden on you. We're committed to low rates. Let's modify that to give us more flexibility, because you really don't want them to have to vote every year on the projects that you're matching dollars for the federal grants. I mean, most of that benefits them. They want you to do it. It's just a burden on them to have to do something about, return a vote on it. And so we agreed to this back then, and now we're swinging it a little bit back their way for the next 3 years by giving them a longer deferral period.
But on capital projects, is it usually 90-10 funding?
It is.
So that means it's got to be a $9 million project before they have any.
Or an ineligible project.
Or an ineligible.
Yeah, so if we did a parking lot out there and it was $3 million, that's not going to be eligible for federal grants. That one is not in an airline-supported cost center, so we could do that without a vote. Now, we've been briefing them every year on what we're doing out of good partnership, but technically they wouldn't have to even vote on that.
Locally, though, have they ever been involved? Have they ever been a barrier?
Oh, well, I don't know if they've ever been a barrier. They have voted. I mean, you can see that they have voted in the past. And they do question it. I mean, Delta and I walked through, one of the requests they made is, can we see your capital program for this period? So we sent them our planned projects, and Delta and I went through them yesterday one by one. And they have great suggestions. One project we're kind of looking at out the next year or two is an LED program in the terminal. Because 10% of our operating budget is utilities costs in here. And we're looking at how we get that down. And she had some really terrific suggestions on, hey, Denver's really good at this. They've hired a person that does this full time, and that would be a good resource to you. And so, it's actually a pretty good discussion to be able to have with somebody that's out there currently at other airports to see if they've got some ideas on how you might implement some of these things. So they do get involved, and every year they call and they'll have a question or two of, why are you doing that? They even asked about the parking lot thing we're doing this year, some of the particulars on that. Most of it's just, I think, more informational than anything, but yeah, they do get involved in it.
Any other questions or comments? And the chair will entertain a motion to give the director the authority to negotiate an extension of the agreement for up to 3 years. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded to give the director the authority to negotiate an extension of the agreement for up to 3 years. Are there any additional comments or questions? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? It's unanimous.
Thank you.
Framing. No, you didn't misspell
Doesn't say
it. It's
framing.
okay. It's farming. Don't get excited. Farming contract.
Defer that one to Farmer Rod or
Farmer Rod.
Farmer Laura here.
Nothing has changed from last month, so we've had this contract, it's formerly S&S, they're now Anderson Hovland Ranch. Their contract expired in March of this year, and we've had a contract with them for 10 years. Maybe it'll be me. So they handle the planting, fertilizing, weed control for certain areas of the airport. It helps us because of our wildlife management plan. It's not necessarily supposed to be a big moneymaker, and it's not. But we do get about $3,500 to $4,000 a year from them. We get a quarter of the crop share. They take 3/4 of the crop share. We have talked to them. They're interested in another extension, which we are recommending 5 years with a 5-year option. For that first 5 years, that amount then will be around $17,000 to $20,000 that we would take in for that. They've done a good job. We've had a few little issues, but we've been able to talk to them and work through it. So we would recommend moving forward with another extension with them, agreement. Questions?
I just want to state that there might be a conflict of interest. The Hovlands are customers of mine, so I'm going to abstain.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Are there any other questions or comments?
Is there any limits to what they can grow?
We
Other-
try
other
to,
than- Other than the property itself?
inside the fence, we have allowed a little bit of grain crops, but they'll do that for a year or something, but we're trying to get them to not do any grain crops inside the fence that would attract wildlife. So they farmed up a couple areas, they put some grain crops in for a year and then tilled them down. I guess it helps the soil. And then now they're, in those areas, they're seeding it back to grass in the fenced AOA area. And then on the outside of the fence, they have a couple of spots where they're gonna do a little bit of barley and kind of rotate some crops before they get it back into grass. But for the most part, we want grass there.
The FAA really objected a couple of years ago to corn.
Yeah, we
with
don't.
that, and we've never had that. So, other than that, the FAA doesn't seem that keenly interested in, in your farming practices.
There are certain limitations on how close you can have like a seed crop or a grain crop
Yeah.
to a runway. It's like 10,000 feet or something. We're out of that.
That's because of birds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We keep the birds out of the corn in particular, I guess, really causes wildlife
Yeah.
issues.
And we've never really had any, on the airport, we don't have very many bird problems. Our bird problems come from geese flying over the airport to these surrounding grain fields. So that's one reason we don't want to set up an attractant on the airfield.
How many acres are we talking about? Out of curiosity.
Oh, I think what they harvest hay-wise is 600-700 acres total. And that's counting inside the fence and then the stuff from the jail all the way down. There's a couple miles between the interstate and the frontage road there.
Any other questions or comments? The board will entertain a motion on the staff recommendation to enter into a 5-year agreement with the Anderson Hudlin Ranch. With a 5-year option with all the other provisions remaining the same. Is there a motion to that effect?
I so
Moved and, is there a second?
I'll second.
It's moved and seconded to approve the recommendation of the staff concerning the farming contract. Are there any questions or comments at this time? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, it's 4-1 with one abstention. Okay. Board comments. Commissioner Buck, do you have any comments at this time?
No, sir.
Commissioner Rooney?
None?
Commissioner?
Excuse me, at the city council meeting, Brad made some comments in support of John, and I just want to acknowledge your comments, thought they were well stated, and appreciate you doing so.
Thank you. Yep. I forgot to bring that up, go ahead. Commissioner Goodson, do you have any comment? Yeah, my only comment was, yes, Commissioner Rooney and Commissioner Holman and I attended the city commission meeting, and I think they were, they're generally interested in what's going on. This is part of the community and the city, and we're separate, but John made a very nice presentation to the city, and it's all, all positive stuff going on up here, so it's kind of fun to be a part of the positive things, and so it's pretty easy for us to be tagging along to that presentation, so it's a good job by John. Any comments from the public at this time? Okay, with no further business to come before the board, I declare the meeting adjourned. And why don't we just take, how many minutes would you? 10 minutes?
5.
5, all right. 5 minutes, and then we'll come back for the work session. So how fast does the C, or the
DC-3?
DC-3 fly?
Well, I think they said they were cruising at about 140 knots, about 150 miles an hour.
It's only this one.
Takes a while to get anywhere.
Yeah, what do you got?
It sips gas compared to other airliners that.
Well, I'm sure it does, yeah, but how about for mile travel?
Literally,
It's quite lengthy. What was their departure field yesterday, the first one?
In Iowa, I don't know which
Oh, they made
airport.
it?
So they flew 6 hours altogether to get here from Iowa. With the fuel stop in the middle of it.
Oh, did they stop for fuel? They were gonna try to make that from Iowa.
I seem to remember them saying they did have a fuel stop.
Okay.
Might have been a rest break too. I don't know.
Yeah.
Iowa, so that's just on the other side of South Dakota.
Yes. Of course, they used to fly those things all over the Pacific too, but they had long range tanks.
Boy, it's just amazing how they did